So light up the candles, one for every year that's gone. We'll sing a song for you, and we're hoping that your birthday wish comes true. Yes, welcome everyone to I Played a Thing's 5th anniversary Q&A. I'm glad you all could make it. Unless something has gone horribly wrong, I should be in Florida at the time this is uploaded, so greetings and best wishes from the Sunshine State. Now, originally, I was planning to go through all the questions, formulate my answers ahead of time, and record this whole thing nice and smooth in a somewhat organized fashion, but I've been doing post-commentary on Princess Crown for such a long time that I kind of miss the spontaneity of live commentary, so in that spirit, I have read all the questions, but I'm going to just handle them on the fly. I haven't really thought about the answers ahead of time, so I'm just gonna wing this thing, because what could possibly go wrong? All of you Trainwreck fans out there, you may very well have a treat coming up. So, let's get that train a-wreckin'. Our very first question comes from someone whose name I don't know how to pronounce. It looks like Ryodice, or Riodice, or Riodice, perhaps? Hopefully it's something like one of those. I do apologize for mangling your name, and I thank you for your question, which is, have you ever played the Sly Cooper games? If so, do you like the series? Well, that's easy enough. The answers are yes and yes. I'm quite fond of them, and I used to have 2 and 3 on the PS2, but I have since unloaded those in favor of the HD collection on PS3. And I am looking forward to the 4th game. Of course, that's being done by Sanzaru instead of Sucker Punch, but hopefully that'll work out okay. I would say that what I've seen so far in previews and such looks promising, so fingers crossed. I would say that my favorite in the series is probably Sly 2, just because it has the best balance, in my opinion, of normal gameplay to minigames, and a good balance of how much you use each of the 3 primary characters, whereas 3 got a little nuts with the minigames, and you didn't spend as much time as the core characters as I would have liked. But all 3 of them are good games. I am definitely a fan. Thank you for your question once again. Oh, and before I move on to the next question, I would like to note that for the last week or so, my subscriber count has fairly reliably hovered in the low 2000s, so it's probably safe to say that I officially have 2,000 subscribers now. Very cool. 2 celebrations in one. Thank you all again for watching, and those of you who have subscribed and commented, thank you for your subscriptions and comments. I do appreciate them all. And now we'll move on to the next question. Next, I have here an email from Alicia Garanson, who I recognize as a very long-time viewer, and also a donor, so mad love to you. And Alicia has submitted 5 questions, which I will plow through in order, starting with, if Nihon Telenet had been immediately put into cryostasis after releasing Exile 2, and then unfrozen today, with today's technology but missing out on all subsequent gaming development progress, what sort of whacked-out historical action RPG mashup would you imagine they would create? That's actually a fairly tough question, but I think I would like Telenet to draw upon their cryostasis experience and create Exile 3, 2.5D side-scrolling action RPG in which Sadler was frozen in a glacier or something of that sort, and thawed out in the modern world. So you have this violent, drug-addled assassin in his red cloak and his turban, just trying to adjust to the modern world and presumably solve some sort of quest or another, perhaps how to travel back to his own time. It's probably a horrible idea, but I'd play it. Second question. Is the section of Rivers of Light, in which you need a second character to progress past a certain point, one of the greatest trolls in gaming ever, surpassing even the part of Snatcher in which they turn the volume down low? Probably not. Reason being, I don't think that was as bad as I showed it off to be. I think I was just being an idiot. Because several people have told me since then that I don't actually have to bring a second character all the way from the beginning. That you can use the mountain moving power there to open up a portal back to the first area of the game that you can bring a second character through. And so that way you can pass to Hero Valley using a second character, but without having to retrace the whole adventure up to that point. Well, such is life, and I guess Don Pedro needed the exercise. Question 3. Would Adol lose all his swag if he traveled from one continent to another by airship instead of by boat? I don't think so. To the best of my knowledge, Adol's vehicle curse is specific to sea travel. So we'll probably never see Adol travel from East Game to East Game by airship, because then you'd have game-breaking equipment right from the beginning, and we can't have that. Alternatively, I suppose they could give Adol all of his equipment from the previous game and introduce some sort of commanding officer who would simply refuse to allow him to use that equipment until various arbitrary points along the storyline, but that would just be silly. Question 4. If you could replace the player avatar in any of your iPad games with Boss Goji, which game would it be? I'm gonna have to say Dark Savior, just because Goji rocking the Drizzt hat, million billion stars. And fifth and final question, what's your favorite bug you recall from any of the games you've played, iPadded or not? Well, I don't know if you could strictly define this as a bug, but it is a case of a game not functioning as intended, which is hopefully close enough. There was a copy of RBI Baseball for the NES that a friend of mine owned back when I was in junior high, and the chip had been damaged, so all of the graphics were really glitched out, but they all still looked like things. For example, all of the batters had their uniforms coming up over their heads like a hood, and their bats had blades attached to them, which were really just triangles, but they looked like blades. So every batter was like a scythe-wielding Grim Reaper. Also, the pitcher's head would come off and reappear under his foot with each pitch, which was certainly entertaining. And the ball was an ice cream cone, and every time you hit a home run, instead of fireworks going off, players' heads would explode in the sky. Also, the text was glitched out, so the letters were mixed up, but you could kind of tell what words were supposed to be. Like, strike was replaced with ooftyke. Yeah, good times. If I was still in touch with that guy, I would try and track him down and see if he still had that copy of RBI, and I would totally buy it off him, because it really made baseball far more entertaining than it has ever been in any other context. Thank you very much for your questions, Alicia. Next up in the Q&A queue, we have Martin S. I am not going to try and pronounce his last name because I guarantee I would butcher it beyond all recognition, and I don't want to do that to him. Now, generally I am skipping straight to the questions in people's messages, because while I absolutely appreciate everyone's congratulations and kind words, I don't want to keep everyone here all day. But I am going to read part of Martin's lead-in because it amuses me. A few of your iPads are also some of my go-to means of helping me fall asleep, which I assure you is a compliment on your style and voice, and by no means an indication that they're boring, just that I know them well. Well, your compliment is taken as intended, Martin. Thank you very much. And we have another series of 5 here, and some of you may recall in the last Princess Crown episode that I mentioned some of these were going to embarrass the hell out of me. Well, here's one of those. The first question is, Why Skunkfuka? Well, the short answer to that is Skunkfuka is a corruption of Skunkfucker. But I realize the short answer is probably somewhat lacking in explanatory power, so I'm going to have to elaborate on that a bit. And in order to properly elaborate, I'm going to have to bust out the admission that I'm some kind of goddamn furry. Now, some of you are already well aware of this, and there are probably internet detectives among you that have figured it out on your own, but I'm afraid so, a card-carrying, convention-attending, animal head person. Hopefully there aren't too many of you running for the exits right now. Anyway, in the 80s and 90s mostly, Skunkfucker was a slur directed at participants in the furry fandom, and I've always found it much more clever and creative than the preferred image board insult, which I would rather not repeat here. So, some years ago, before I was playing things, I was planning some sort of project related to the fandom, and I needed a domain name for it. And I thought I would base that on Skunkfucker, but I didn't actually want to use a domain name as vulgar as Skunkfucker directly. So I looked for things that sounded kinda like it, and the closest thing I could find for fucker was Fuqua, like Antoine Fuqua, director of such films as Training Day and Brooklyn's Finest, but Skunk Antoine Fuqua didn't make a whole lot of sense. So, pursuing that direction further, I found out that Fuqua was another name for the bitter melon, which is why if you go to the main page of skunkfuka.com, you see two photographs, one of a skunk and one of a pile of bitter melons. Anyway, that project never actually came to fruition, but I had the domain name, I liked the sound of it, so skunkfuka.com remains the host for I Play the Things downloadable videos. The second question in the series, will we be seeing more of Boss Goji and GTF? I'm sure you will. I don't do a whole lot of collaboration because my schedule is kind of unreliable, it's technically a bit more difficult, and I do like to do live commentary when possible, and introducing streaming into the whole process would complicate things all the more, but I'm sure I will do more collaborations in the future, and Goji and GTF would definitely be among my preferred co-commentators. So, yeah, I can't make any promises on when that'll happen or in what context, but I'm sure it will happen again. Martin S.'s third question is, what's the best way for us to get more unstories like the grilled bananas? I admit I often have trouble telling which of those are genuinely funny for a first-time listener, and which of the ones where you really kinda had to be there, but I'll try and think of some more and slip them into my commentary. Once again, I can't make any specific promises, but if I have any relevant opportunity to drop a worthy story from my experiences, I will try and keep that in mind. Question number 4. Did you ever find more info on the original version of Exile? I'm afraid I have not. I really should look into that more one of these days, but thus far I have not gotten around to it, and so I'm afraid I can't supply any new information on that front. And the fifth and final question in the Martin S. collection, which iPad did you like most, and which least, and why? Picking a favorite is pretty difficult, but I'm gonna have to go with Dark Savior. A lot of wonderful stuff happened in that LP, a lot of it accidental, and it's such a goofy game. It's really endearing, I find, despite its technical problems related to the poor combat system and the hardware limitations of the Saturn. Has a great cast of characters, some wonderfully stupid dialogue like Gary and the Turtle Whisperer. It was just a really good time. And as for my least favorite, there are a couple of contenders, but I think I will say Revenge of Shinobi. Mostly because I played very badly, I was really off my game, and I don't think I was able to break out much good material over the course of that LP. You know, I don't think it made the angels weep or anything, but they can't all be gold, and that one, in my opinion, was not. Thank you very much for your questions, Martin, and we will duly move along. Our next Q in search of an A comes courtesy of Senshu Risakami, which is another name I hope I'm pronouncing at least vaguely correctly. Anyway, this is kind of a two-part question, so the first part, for a very typical question, how about your absolute, all-time, I end up going back to it again and again, favorite game? Well, there's a lot of very respectable competition for that spot, but at the end of the day, it can only be Space Harrier. There was a period from 1985 to 1986, after that came out in the arcades, that at every opportunity I would just live, breathe, eat, sleep, shit, and puke Space Harrier. I don't even want to think about how many quarters I dumped into it, but I did absolutely adore it, and I achieved a level of mastery at that game that I don't think I've ever recreated in any game since. In 1985, Space Harrier was really, really ahead of its time, and I think its aesthetic, despite being entirely sprite-based 3D, holds up surprisingly well today. It's still a very playable game, and yeah, it's one that I don't think I'll ever really get tired of, and not be able to come back at least once in a while for a playthrough. For the second part of the Senshu's question, since that question is so typical, how about telling us about a game you would make? What aspects of other games would your game have? What is something new you would bring to the table? Well, I have often thought about what it might be like to design an RPG that combines some of my favorite things from the Eastern and Western design sensibilities. From Japan, I think the biggest influences would be the Phantasy Star and Final Fantasy games, from the 16-bit era especially, and maybe some Persona 3 and 4 thrown in there. And from the West, I think my biggest influence would be Ultima, because I've always been a really huge Ultima fan, aside from when the series kind of crashed and burned toward the very end. But from JRPGs, I'd like to keep the sense of scale and otherworldliness that you would get in some of the crazy spell effects and the big creative monster designs, especially like you would see in the Megaten series and its various spin-offs. From Ultima, I would like to keep the sense of everything having purpose. Pretty much every character in the later Ultimas, like from 5 and up, would be a unique person with deep dialogue trees and the sense that they have a place that they belong in the world. You know, they have a job, they have a schedule. Everyone is someone, and just about every character in every location, even if they're just a peasant or a little fort or something like that, everything has some meaning. I don't get as much into stuff like the Elder Scrolls games because they have tons of content, but at the risk of annoying some people, I really feel like a lot of it has kind of a filler feel to it. Like, there are a lot of randomly generated dungeons, and a lot of characters that don't really have anything to say besides, you know, I saw a mud crab yesterday, or something to that effect. You know, your mileage may vary, but to me, they tend to feel like butter scraped over too much bread. As for something new I'd like to bring to the table, I imagine this game having a combat system that is real-time, but party-based. So you're controlling one character directly at a time, whether it's the main character or you're jumping into someone else's body for a period, kind of like Final Fantasy XII. And meanwhile, everyone else is following their AI scripts, and you can give them general orders like, you know, you be the healer, or you defend, you do as much damage as possible, stuff like that. And this isn't entirely new, it's kind of a combination of Final Fantasy XII and 13, but one thing that would be new in this, or at least something I haven't seen in any other games, I would like to see your party members learn. For example, if you fight a new kind of monster and someone happens to throw a fire spell at it and it does a ton of damage, then that character could yell out, hey, this thing seems to be really hurt by fire, and then, all of your party members would hear that, and in the future they would know to use fire spells on that monster as part of their AI routine if they were in a role that allowed them to use fire magic, or otherwise use some kind of fire-based attack against that monster. And so you wouldn't have to constantly tell them to use fire against this specific monster or use ice against this specific monster. They would just learn from experience and be able to repeat successful patterns as part of their AI routines. I don't know, I think it would be interesting. Well, thank you very much, Senshu, and we will move along to next in line. Who's up? 3 Jack Burton. What do you have for me, 3 Jack Burton? Sup, hun? I really enjoyed your Dark Savior iPad. Thank you. The game is kind of a mixed bag, though, isn't it? It had some awesome ideas, while some things didn't pan out or seemed half-assed. It seems like it had more potential to be a really great game instead of just a good one. My question for the Q&A is, do you think that is fair to say, and what do you think the developers could have done to take the game to the next level? Well, for starters, I think that is an absolutely fair assessment. Dark Savior, as I touched on earlier, just absolutely charms the hell out of me, but it is a very problematic little charmer. A substantial part of that, I think, was the technological limitations of the time. Dark Savior, I would say, probably suffered quite a bit from being on the first real generation of 3D-oriented consoles. The Saturn definitely held it back, and it might have fared somewhat better on the PlayStation, but I think that would still have been a bottleneck. Even beyond the aesthetics, what they could do with the level design, it just seemed like they were really constrained by the geometry, and then of course the aesthetics are also a factor. You had things like the incredibly awkward and glitchy-looking polygon Drizzt that just really didn't have the impact they could have if they didn't look so ridiculous. And the other thing that I think really held it back was the combat system. I don't think it's necessarily a problem that the combat wasn't a huge part of the game. Having a smaller number of beefier encounters, I'm okay with that rather than having lots of enemies scattered all over the levels, Zelda style, or even Landstalker style. But if you're gonna have a smaller number of more beefy encounters, you have to have a worthy combat system, which Dark Savior just didn't. The idea of a fighting game style one-on-one combat system has some merit. We saw it in also a flawed form, but a much better form recently in Princess Crown. But in Dark Savior, it was just really a matter of finding the right distance and just knocking the enemy down over and over again. And that's just very repetitive, not much fun, and incredibly shallow. And so I think if they had kept the idea of keeping the combat a once-in-a-while thing, but made it much better when it did happen, greater depth, just more enjoyable fighting mechanics, that would have helped. And then if they wanted to continue to focus on platforming and environmental hazards, then just having done the game in a later generation on more powerful hardware, I think would have helped, because then they could do more with traps, do more interesting platforming stuff, not be constrained quite so much by it being hard to tell what's going on in the primitive graphics, that sort of thing. A very interesting question in any case, and I thank you very much for it, Mr. Burton. Coming up fast on the outside, we have a handful of questions from Matt Browning. What do you actually do for work in the real world, if you're allowed to tell me? Yes, I'm allowed to tell you. I do desktop support and other miscellaneous IT computer-type stuff for a medical library. Also, what happened to Goji and GTF? Was there some sort of ceasing of your cohabitation, or are they simply busy? Well, slight correction to that. It was just Goji that I was living with for a few years. GTF I have never actually met offline. All of our collaboration we've done over Skype and IMs. As for Boss Goji, there were some practical problems with the living arrangement, and so we did end up parting ways in the physical realm. But we do stay in touch, and we are still getting along quite well, and it doesn't stop us from collaborating in the future. In fact, Trampoline Terror was done after Goji had moved out, and along with GTF we did that whole thing over Skype. So, that's the situation. As to why I haven't had them on for guest commentary in a while, that's all pretty much explained in my previous answer. Mainly that it's harder to schedule and a little more technically demanding, and unless I want to stream, it keeps me from doing live commentary, so it's just not a thing I do very often, but I am open to the possibility in the future. How many languages do you speak? And if not speak, how many do you know phrases of? Also, do you consider yourself a learned man? Well, as for how many languages I speak, I'm afraid it's just the one I'm speaking right now. Yes, I am a typical Yank in that respect, being shamefully monolingual. As for how many I know phrases of, I suppose a fair few. Snippets of Japanese and German, tiny little bit of Spanish, an even tinier bit of French. Certainly not enough to even approximate a conversation in any of those. I took a lot of Latin in school, which I've retained a fair bit of, but that does not have a whole lot of practical application in today's world. And a learned man. Within reason, I suppose. I do have a college education, and I would consider myself fairly intellectually curious. I enjoy learning about interesting things and do a goodly amount of reading, and keep up with what's going on in the world. I've been told I have a fairly impressive vocabulary. Certainly, I am not going to be rubbing elbows with Neil deGrasse Tyson at any point in the near future, but I've managed to get this far in life without jamming a crayon into my eye. That's gotta count for something. Anyway, that's all the questions from Matt Browning. My thanks to you. Well, I still have more than a few of your questions left, but at the time of this recording, I have to leave for my Florida trip in the morning, and I really should get some sleep. So I'll tell you what I'll do. We're gonna break for now, and when I get back from vacation, I will attend to the rest of your questions and hopefully provide them with satisfactory answers. So the I Played a Thing 5th anniversary celebration is not over quite yet. The good times keep a-rolling, hopefully next weekend. I should have time to attend to the rest of your questions then. In the meantime, thank you again for watching, and for helping to make it a most enjoyable 5 years. So until next time, this is your unsinkable taste of Cheerios, signing off. Be excellent to each other.